Perfect. All right. So we are now live here with our guest today, Phil Reinhardt. Welcome, Phil.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing good.
Good, good. All right. So for anybody just joining us who hasn't joined us for one of our live streams before, my name is Sophie Gabriel. I am our communications manager here at the Owl's Head Transportation Museum. And this is part of our live stream series where we are introducing our upcoming Shifting History episodes with a featured guest, an industry expert. Phil today is our industry expert. No pressure, Phil.
All right, I'll try and keep up to those expectations.
All right, so for anybody who is new to this format, feel free to go ahead and type right in on Facebook any questions that you have for Phil. There is a lot to ask about. I am not gonna lie. When I was going over your bio, Phil, I was having a hard time keeping to my 100-character limit. So let's do a quick bio about why Phil. So Phil, you have been everything from a graduate of McPherson College, correct?
Yes.
Captain of Monhegan Boat Line, right?
One of them, yes.
One of the captains, absolutely. And a long-term and long adored volunteer of the Owl's Head Transportation Museum.
Yeah, almost, I think 11 years now.
And you are now the owner of, I believe, one of the most talked about restoration shops on the scene right now in Mid-Coast, Maine. This is a big deal. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself before I start fangirling about it.
All right. Well, I've just always gravitated towards anything mechanical. When I was a kid, I'd go with my dad to work at the construction company where he works. And my favorite thing to do was hang around in the shop and watch mechanics work on dump trucks and excavators. And that's where it kind of started for me. And, you know, Legos turned into lawnmowers and lawnmowers turned into tractors and tractors turned into cars. And so it's just a very gradual progression, lots of trial by error learning. And when it came time to look at schools, I found out about McPherson College and how they were the only 4-year bachelor's degree in antique automotive restoration. And that sounded
you're the
perfect.
only one.
The only 4-year program.
Wow.
Yep. There's a couple of 2-year programs, but they're the only 4-year bachelor's degree in antique auto restoration.
Very cool.
And yeah, went from there and I've worked at a few different shops, regular repair shops and restoration shops, and missed home, so came back and started my own right down the road.
Now, is that secretly what you always knew you were going to end up doing?
No, not exactly. I've seen other friends around my age as well that I've met through school who've started their own shops, and I've seen them, running around like chickens with their head cut off. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. So for a while there, I kind of convinced myself that maybe that's not what I want to do. But despite all the stress and doing the billing on top of all the work and worrying about the bills and the electricity and the insurance and all that stuff, it is very rewarding on top of all that.
Right. So do you find you are running around like a chicken with your head cut off?
Yeah,
absolutely. All right, folks, for anyone just joining us, we are chatting with Phil Reinhardt. Feel free to send in any questions that you have into the comments section. For any questions that you have for Phil about his experience or about his adventure into owning his own restoration shop. Phil, I know that I have to just get one thing right out of the way. You've been watching the Shifting History series, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know, Phil is one of the cast members and takes a leading role in the episode that will premiere today at 2:00. And what I find so interesting when I'm watching the series, especially, the differences between Tom, the lead, and you, it's that not all millennials are created equal when it comes to mechanical stuff. Do you find that there is that there's a lot of interest amongst your peers in getting into this kind of thing, but maybe they just didn't have the same exposure that you did, as a kid, because you definitely had a lot of opportunities to get involved.
Yeah, and I think now if you're a young person, this is the perfect time to get into cars. because there's just obviously such a need and, you know, a desire with the car community to kind of foster this towards the next generation, you know, and foster these young kids and, you know, keep it alive.
Right.
I guess amongst my peers, you know, I was living in very special conditions, so I was kind of always surrounded by people who were, you know, crazy about cars.
Right. Well, and I was talking to somebody else the other day, because what I think is interesting is, you were immersed in that, obviously, from it sounds, I mean, you said Legos turned into lawnmowers. So, from Lego age, that's a pretty early start. And I know that when I was, finally, when I got my license, being, another millennial right along with you and Tom, I was always told, don't touch anything under the hood that you don't know what you're doing. You can put on a spare tire in the case of an emergency. But if it deviates from what you've been told how to do, then stop, call someone, call your father, call your friend. Don't try and change your own oil because you'll probably get oil everywhere, that sort of thing. And so there are a lot of millennials that had my experience where the hood, all of the mechanical stuff was kind of a do not fly zone. Which kind of goes right in the face of, the Model T era, of yesteryear, where you learned to drive, you learned to be mobile and stay mobile by tinkering.
Yeah.
So you think that there is a need for a resurgence of people safely having a curiosity with that stuff?
Yeah, I'd say so. Because these are all man-made devices, and at some point they'll fail. It's just in their nature, especially the old stuff. I guess I just kind of grew up driving unreliable vehicles, running unreliable equipment, and so I grew up on a farm, and so it was a relative consequence-free environment. So just like I said earlier, trial by error, and doing lots of research online and calling Warren nonstop. I met him pretty early on in my mechanical education, so I was on the phone with him quite a bit throughout.
Well, and I know he's a great resource.
Yeah.
I did just get a question sent in, Phil, via text, wondering what was the first vehicle? What was one of these early unreliable cars?
So my first one didn't even run, and it still hasn't run to this day.
You still have it? You still have your first car?
I calling it my first car is being really generous. It's a 1953 Jeep that my great grandfather bought new, and I'd never seen it run in my life, but it always sat in the field when I was a kid. It last ran in the 90s. My dad last ran it then, and I was like 9 years old. I was going to restore it. And so I just basically blew the thing apart, just took it all apart. And I still to this day, I've since organized the pieces and put them inside. But it's never gone back together. But that, I got to take apart transmissions, take apart the engine, and see what was inside all that stuff. So I guess that was really the first vehicle I ever worked on. But it was more of an experiment, I guess you'd say.
So we won't be putting that on your shop's kind of restoration testimonial pages quite yet. No. All right. But honestly, inspiring, the idea that at 9 years old you were like, see this massive thing right here? I'm gonna take that apart.
Yeah.
That's some confidence, Phil, that most 9-year-olds do not have. But so talking about your shop, so the name of your shop is Mechanical Arts Vintage Auto Specialists, right?
Yes.
In St. George, which is also coincidentally where you're from.
Yes.
Nice. And so talk a little bit about what your shop offers. Is it, I'm assuming you would not be working on my 2012 Scion IQ, correct?
No.
What sort of stuff do you guys specialize in?
So really, what we kind of focus on is vehicles pre-1980. I like to avoid the onset of computers. That just opens up a whole nother can of worms, which at some point I probably will have to swallow that pill, but I'm going to hold that off as long as I can.
Right.
And so mechanical work, engine rebuilding, transmission, axle, drivetrain, general drivetrain, heavy fabrication, electrical work. I really enjoy electrical work, which I find is uncommon among a lot of car people. But
Why?
I guess a lot of people, especially on older stuff, like regarded as like a dark art. um, and so,
Is it anything like, I mean, I don't know anything about cars, and I try and give everybody fair warning about that. Is it like trying to rewire an old house? Like it's always a bit different every time and can be a little bit like anxiety producing trying to troubleshoot stuff?
yes. And so the
Gotcha.
worst thing is trying to repair someone's poorly done previous repairs.
Good enough,
I'll say
Glenn.
I enjoy
You got to
electrical
it
work.
first.
The electrical work I enjoy the most is doing it from scratch.
Mm.
That's a lot of fun.
Do you ever just tell clients like something's too far gone? Like, I have no idea what your friend Bob did, but we got to start over.
Yeah, I've had to have those discussions a couple of times, and there's been a couple cars where I should have had those discussions.
Oh, so about how long? And this is again, I mean, you've met me through the museum, so by the time I hear about a restoration, it's usually when it's done, and we're promoting it as part of the auction or as part of a development program on a collection vehicle. But how long does the average, if someone came to you and said they wanted a, what do they call them, rotisserie restorations?
Yeah, I guess frame off restoration.
Frame off, yeah. I like that much better. Rotisserie just makes me think of chicken. But a frame off restoration, is it always different depending on what's happened before for the car? Or can you, as a new business owner, kind of say, okay, we're talking 3 to 6 months, or we're talking this many hours a week, or?
It's really hard to say. I am very hesitant about giving estimates on restorations because you don't really know till you have the thing apart exactly what it's all going to entail. It depends on where the car was stored, how it was treated, and the type of car it is. Restoring it'd be pretty easy to give a quote on, say, restoring a run-of-the-mill Model T, because all the parts are out there. You can literally buy everything for them. And they're overly simple. You can get a very good gauge, a good feel for the car by spending some time with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's flat rates, like rebuilding the engine costs this much.
Mm-hmm.
That's the running rate, and rebuilding the axle costs this much, I guess. So the biggest determining factor is the car and its condition.
Right. And so do you enjoy that process?
Enjoy the process of estimating?
Diagnosing, like basically, being the crime scene investigator when you first get on the scene, like of a 1962 Studebaker something. I don't even know if they made Studebakers in that year. I'm guessing, but you know what I mean? Like, is that part fun for you to figure out what it's going to take, like the investment of time and what you can do with it to make it gorgeous again and run well? Is that fun?
I like developing the plan and like talking with the customer about his goals. Basically, that's the first thing you got to do is, what do you expect from this? Because you don't want to have a differing idea between me and the customer. So basically, what are you expecting me to do, and what are you expecting to do with this car?
Right.
Is that really affects how you tackle it.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine with so many different variables, you have to, and so many different options and outcomes, like you have to develop a pretty good relationship with these folks.
Yeah, they have to trust me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, and for a lot of people, trust is a big thing because, I mean, we see it all the time, folks. A lot of folks who are kind of they're accidental collectors because they've inherited something from a parent or from a sibling, and or it's something that's nostalgic and reminds them of something their grandfather used to own. So do you find more often than not that people who are collectors, there is an emotional tie to that hobby?
Oh yeah. I mean, without a doubt, a car is the most engaging, in my opinion, I mean, one of the most engaging things you can do is drive an old car. You know, it engages all the senses, you know, sight, smell, hearing, you know,
Yep.
you feel it. You know, very rewarding. So I think a lot of people will have emotional attachments to these cars, you know, and at least every customer that I have does,
That's awesome.
which is nice. So then, so, you know, when they have that connection, they're usually willing to do what's right for the car.
Yep.
So when someone says, "Oh, I plan on selling this. I just need you to like to do this, that, and the other thing just so I can sell it." I don't really like doing those kind of jobs. You know, they're trying to spend the least amount of money. They want to cut corners.
They want a house flip.
Exactly. And so, you know, I like the customers that are like, you know, I had a Volkswagen bus that I had been sitting since 2009 that I returned to the road. They're like, well, we bought this in 1984 and we've been, you know, all over the place with it. And the people that we bought it from drove it to every national park in the United States. You know, like cars, a story like that.
Right.
So it's, I enjoy that kind of stuff. Or, you know, I've had this car longer than my wife. And so I'd keep this and, you know, I'd let her go before I let this car go, stuff like that.
Sadly, yes, definitely something we've heard before here, but so Phil, what is the coolest restoration that you've worked on for whatever reason?
There's one I can't talk about yet, which I thought was really interesting.
But a TBD down the road.
Yeah.
All right. So what is the second coolest restoration you've ever worked on?
It was in, that's tough.
And don't worry, I won't tell Warren if it's not a Model T. I'm sure.
In my shop or in general? In my work experience.
Let's do in general, from when you started at the ripe young age of 9 to now.
I have helped at a shop I worked at after graduation. I worked on a lot of high-end European cars, Ferraris, Porsches.
Oh, wow.
Mercedes, and I learned an incredible amount there. And I mean, those are definitely some of the coolest ones.
Why?
Why?
Why are they cool, or how are they different than American cars?
It's just different engineering philosophies, you know, different cultures, and that translates into their cars. Nice. So, you know, the Italian cars are kind of like a piece of art. They're put together one step at a time, you know, and you can see the welding slag, and they're very underneath. They're very crude. Is not the most complimenting, not the most, I guess, doesn't really paint it in a positive light. But that's how those Italian cars were done. You know, they're, you know, Luigi on a Friday afternoon, just kind of eyeballing it with his thumb, and that looks good. And it shows that they're beautiful cars. And then, you know, like the German cars from the same period, say the 1950s, you know, I just picture the German guys in a lab coat and goggles, and everything is precise. There's a, you know, exact spec for every single part. It goes together in a certain way, and that's the only way it'll go together. That's the only way it will go apart. And they wrote everything down. I mean, the manuals for these vintage Mercedes and vintage Porsches, I mean, are absolutely incredible. I mean,
like detailed and
very detailed, very, you know, procedure oriented, step by step. Whereas the Italian cars, the manuals are very general, very vague. And for some of the cars, they don't even have them.
What?
So, yeah.
They don't have a manual?
For some cars, you know, or some variants of cars, you know, if it was a special variant, it might not even have really much literature that exists on it at all.
Wow. That's hard to believe.
You know, that's another way that the car hobby is so engaging, in my opinion, is, you know, you can look at cars from different nationalities and see, you know, traits of that culture ingrained in how the car's built, how it performs.
Right.
You know, how easy it is to work on or not.
Right. So, random question, totally random, but you said that you like to avoid anything kind of post 1980, you know, because of the computer aspect of it, with an understanding that, you know, there'll have to be some, you know, possibly getting into that at some point. But Do you see, when you see modern cars and you're kind of going under the hood and seeing how modern cars are put together, do you kind of find yourself going into a, kind of older than your years moment of, darn, youngsters need so much Bluetooth technology and everything and blah, 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 do you see the need for those kinds of things, or do you kind of wish it hadn't gone in that direction? I know that's a weird question.
I see the need for it. With the emission standards, crash safety standards, all that kind of stuff, basically necessitated. We got to squeeze every last bit of energy out of every last drop of gasoline, and you can't do that analog.
Yeah,
it's got to be digital. That computer that runs the engine is making 4,000 or 5,000 adjustments every second.
right.
There's no way a carburetor can do that, or
Right.
points of ignition can do that. And so, no, I don't resent it when
When something breaks, I do.
I just choose not to. The newest vehicle that I've ever owned was 1998.
What was it?
It was a Harley Davidson Sportster. It was a motorcycle. So that was pretty much ancient technology anyways. They didn't change anything.
Oh, all right. So, Phil, we do have a question from Joe. Joe's wondering, was McPherson College worthwhile? You talk a bit about your experience with that program.
Without a doubt. It was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made going there. It is just a great campus to be on. 750 kids at most. Everyone. I'm from Maine, so I'm always used to small schools. So
Right.
even though I was in the middle of Kansas cornfields and wheat fields, it felt like home.
So it was in Kansas, yeah?
Yes. And the staff are absolutely incredible. They bring years of industry experience, stories, lessons learned to the table. My electrical professor worked on the Apollo program, electrical engineer. It's just like,
that's NASA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And crazy stuff like that. They have a really good balance of classroom sessions and practical learning. Since it's a bachelor's degree, I had to take maths and, science classes and social studies and all that on top of it. But as far as in the automotive side of it, they really found a good balance. Where you're learning about something one day in the class, and then the next day you're actually in the lab working on that system in the car.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. So it was an actual, so instead of like shop time, it was just like lab time, like if you were taking a bio class or nursing.
Exactly.
Yep. That's very cool. So like very interactive, very immersive.
Yes, and very personalized. And there's so many paths you can take through the program. I was automotive restoration technology, which is just the full-on hands-on in the shop. But they have automotive restoration management, where in addition to your automotive classes, you take business classes.
Oh, wow.
If you want to do booking or management, stuff like that. There's automotive restoration communications. A lot of students have gone into journalism out of the program. So they'll take, journalism and communications classes on top of their auto classes. There's a history specialization as well. Because a lot of the work, especially on the more obscure cars, is just the researching the part of it. So
you're really getting
a slice of the pie for everyone.
Yeah. Well, because it's I know that I am not math or science inclined enough to be able to pull off some, probably some of those classes, but I know Rob, our curator, and Tom and Warren, they hear me talking all the time about how, it takes so much longer to, when you're working in an environment like this, where, in order to, present an exhibit or something like that, I have to start from scratch on almost every car learning about it. So the idea that there's a program out there to be able to have that background knowledge is so valuable. That's amazing.
Yeah, it
Very
truly
cool.
was. It went by way too quick.
Well, but still, I think it's a great idea that there's a program out there like that. But you said there are some 2-year schools as well. Did you find that there were people coming after 2 years kind of transferring into the 4-year program? or?
Um, I never met anyone that transferred into my program from the others.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of my peers visited the other programs as well. I did, and I ended up picking McPherson over them.
Oh, nice. Now, what was Kansas like? Because I know I'm from Maine, and I mean, I love traveling, and I liked being in Boston for 8 years. But when I came home, boy, was I ready
Yeah,
to come back home. Kansas is a lot further than I was in Boston.
yeah. I liked it. It was it's really, it puts into perspective how big the country is. Because
Yeah.
you can, takes 3 days or more to drive across this country, and you're smack dab in the middle of it when you're in Kansas. And even
Oh,
though we're
that's
speaking
true.
the same
Yeah.
language, and there's still Walmarts and McDonald's, it does kind of feel like a different world.
Right.
People couldn't be nicer in the Midwest. Absolutely amazing people.
Yep.
Um, Very hardworking, welcoming, and being in a small town is, it's like Rockland. You get to know everyone. Like I went to a diner. It's like my sophomore year, just for breakfast on a weekend by myself, and before work. And I sit down at the counter next to this guy, and he's like, "Oh, you're that kid from Maine, aren't you?" And I'm like, "I've never met this guy ever." And so some people don't like that, but I like that.
Well, I think it's exactly it's kind of like growing up here, I mean, when I got back in town, I had people who were saying like, "Oh, so how is Somerville?" And I'm like, "What? Who are you?"
Yeah.
But that's the way it goes. So it must have been very familiar. Hey, Phil, we have another question from Joe. Joe wants to know, does your shop have fabrication capabilities? I'm assuming he's not talking about fabric. You know more than I do. And he says, because you always hear about a part that isn't available and has to be handmade. I know we hear that here at the museum. So do you fabricate things?
Yeah, so I'm trying to expand on that capability equipment wise.
Mhm.
I got a lathe on the way, welders, grinders, drill presses, and I'm trying to find a Bridgeport milling machine, because
Aren't we
between a
all?
lathe and a Bridgeport, you can kind of make nearly anything for an old car.
What is a Bridgeport drilling machine for all of
Milling
the
machine.
plebs out there that don't know? I know, but other people don't.
A Bridgeport milling machine is a machine tool. It looks similar to just an oversized drill, but you can fit all sorts of different attachments to it, different bits, um, to make parts essentially. And they're an old piece of equipment, and they haven't really been used in manufacturing or production in a while now. And the people who know how to use them are retiring or passing away, so the prices are coming down on them now because not many people know how to use them.
But you do.
But they taught us in school.
Nice.
It took a year's worth of machining courses.
Wow.
So
So
uh,
what's the part that you haven't been able to find, for example, that you've looked, you've hunted, you checked eBay, you were up late nights, you called everybody you knew. What's something you haven't been able to find?
that I have not been able to find. That's a good one. At school, I made a adapter plate. I built an engine for my Model T in school that uses a 1928 Chevrolet cylinder head on a Model T engine. So it's two parts that were never meant to go together. But
Fair
it
enough.
basically makes a hot rod Model T engine. You make more power, just
Oh,
to
cool.
simplify it. And so back in the day, they made kits for this conversion. And then there was this guy, Neil Jern, who made kits up through the 2000s, and then he died, and then no one took it up again. And
Okay.
so I wanted to make one of these engines. And so I found a guy who had one of these kits, and he let me reverse engineer it. So I could find the part, but I couldn't keep it.
Oh, okay.
So I basically reverse engineered it.
So
With
even
a lot of
without
help from my professors and friends at school.
so even without finding the part, there were still resources in the automotive community that you
Yeah.
were able to track down.
Yeah.
Which seems pretty in keeping with what we see around here when it comes to that core group that seems small but is huge and is literally everywhere.
It's all in who you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, we are at the end of our live chat for today. But if anybody wants to keep track of all of Phil's, adventures at his new shop in St. George, can they find you right on Facebook, Phil?
Yes, we're on Facebook as Mechanical Arts.
Nice. And I believe a website too, right?
No, just Facebook at the moment.
Just Facebook for right now. Okay. For anybody else who is looking for something to do this afternoon, keep an eye on our YouTube channel, the museum's YouTube channel, at 2 o'clock when we premiere Phil's kind of starring role in Shifting History with episode 7. Hard to believe we're coming to the end already, but episode 7 where Phil tries to help Tom.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.